All right, so we've got this situation brewing, and it looks like a real showdown, between like the executive branch, the Trump administration's Justice Department, to be exact, and a federal judge.
Oh, yeah, this is a juicy one.
Yeah, and it all comes down to a deportation case.
The Venezuelan migrants.
You got it.
And they're throwing around this thing called state secrets privilege.
The state secrets privilege. It's like a shield they can use.
Exactly. They're saying, nope, can't tell you. National security, But it's how they're using it in this case that's got everyone talking.
Right. Because it really does feel like a test of, the whole checks and balances thing we always hear about.
The heart of the matter is this legal tactic. They're using the state secrets privilege to basically sidestep a judge's order in a deportation case. Now, this privilege, in its purest form, allows the executive branch to keep information under wraps during legal proceedings, but only, and this is key, if revealing that information would genuinely harm national security.
And that's what we're going to dig into today, right?
Today? Exactly. We need to unpack how they're applying it in this specific situation.
So to do that, we've got some great reporting from CBS News.
And we'll be drawing on a really sharp analysis by Glenn Kirshner. You can find it on YouTube.
He lays it all out. So as you listen along with us today, our goal is to help you guys navigate all these legal twists and turns.
It can get pretty dense.
Yeah, so we want to break down that central conflict for you. Like what even started this whole deportation case?
What are the legal arguments they're slinging back and forth?
Yeah, and what does it all mean for the way our government actually works?
And especially for the people caught in the middle of all this.
Right. And we know you're busy, so we're going to make it clear and to the point.
Yeah.
No need to get bogged down, right?
Absolutely. Straight to the good stuff.
Let's start with the background of this deportation case.
Okay, so we've got Judge James Boasberg. He's in the federal district court in D.C.
Right.
And he issued this order. It basically told the Trump administration, hey, turn those planes around.
The planes carrying the Venezuelan migrants.
Yep, those are the ones.
And it's super important to remember, this wasn't some kind of blanket release order, right?
No, not at all.
Both the news reports and Kirshner's analysis make it super clear that Judge Boasberg's move came from this worry about a lack of fairness, a lack of what they call due process for these individuals.
Now, they were accused of being gang members.
Right, but it seemed like the legal process wasn't being followed to make sure they actually had a chance to defend themselves.
To be heard.
Exactly, to be heard. And his concern wasn't necessarily like, let them all go free.
No, it was more about making sure the legal system was working the way it's supposed to.
The integrity of the whole thing.
Which is, kind of important.
Kind of the bedrock. And that's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Trump administration's reaction to this order is when they bring out the state secrets privilege.
And that's where the plot thickens.
Okay, so Judge Boasberg asked for some pretty basic information, right?
Yeah. Stuff like, okay, when did these deportation flights land? Who was on them? Pretty standard stuff a judge would need to know to make sure their order's being followed.
But the Trump administration...
They clammed up. They basically said, nope, not sharing.
And their reasoning.
State secrets privilege. Their legal team claimed that revealing these details, the when and who of these flights, would somehow put a wrench in diplomatic relations.
Oh, yeah, and risk national security. That's a pretty serious claim, right?
Sounds serious, but when you look at the details that Kirshner brings up, it raises some eyebrows.
It does, because not only did the government lawyers refuse to play ball with the judge's request for info,
they actually went to an appeals court, asking them to throw out Judge Boasberg's original order and let those deportations keep rolling without giving him the info he asked for.
Yeah. And that move to the appeals court just makes things even more complicated.
Adds another layer of legal wrangling. And the reports suggest that the judges on that appeals court panel, well, they weren't all on the same page.
They were divided.
That's right. Which is a really important piece of this puzzle.
Absolutely. Especially when you look at what one of the judges said, Circuit Court Judge Patricia Millett. She made this really striking comparison. She pointed out that even people detained in the U.S. during World War II under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which is the same law they're using in this case, even Nazi detainees got more legal consideration than these Venezuelan immigrants.
Wow.
I know, right? It really makes you step back and think about the arguments being made here.
It really does. It highlights how serious these due process concerns are, the ones that made Judge Boasberg step in the first place.
So let's bring in Glenn Kirshner's take on this whole thing.
From his YouTube analysis, he doesn't mince words.
He calls The Trump administration's use of the state seeker's privilege, in this case, idiotic.
Straight to the point.
Yeah, and he makes a pretty convincing case against it, too.
His main argument boils down to the kind of information the administration is trying to hide. We're talking about who was on those planes, when they took off, when they landed.
And as Kirshner points out, this isn't like super secret spy stuff that the state secret's privilege was meant to protect.
The people who were deported, they know when they were put on those flights.
Right. And the flight crews, they have schedules.
The ground crews at the airports, they were involved too.
It's not like this is info locked away in some secret vault, right?
And here's the kicker. Reports say the government of El Salvador, where these folks were allegedly being sent, they know too. And they were supposedly paid to house them.
So the idea that telling a federal judge these basic facts would somehow put national security at risk.
It's a stretch, to say the least.
It really is. And then Kirshner points out Judge Boasberg's background.
This isn't just some random judge.
No. This guy was appointed to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISC, back in 2014. He even served as the presiding judge there from 2020 to 2021.
FISC judges work with super sensitive national security info all the time. That's what they do, authorized surveillance.
And this is where it gets even wilder.
Hold on, it gets wilder.
Oh, yeah. Because in 2020, Judge Boasberg was also appointed to the U.S. Alien Terrorist Removal Court. And he was made the chief judge there.
The Alien Terrorist Removal Court, that's a specialized court, right?
Exactly. It's specifically for figuring out if non-citizens should be deported because of possible ties to terrorism.
So as Kirshner emphasizes, judges on that court are trusted with super classified intel about terrorism threats. They have high-level security clearances.
They're used to reviewing sensitive info through these special procedures, like ex parte presentations.
Where only one side, usually the Justice Department lawyers, gets to present information.
Right, and in camera review, where they look at sensitive stuff in private so it doesn't become public.
These procedures exist for a reason. They let the government share sensitive stuff with the court, but in a way that protects national security.
So when you think about Judge Boasberg's experience
and the trust he's been given to handle top-secret national security info.
The Trump administration's saying he can't be trusted with basic details about these deportation flights. It just doesn't add up.
It really makes you wonder, why are they really holding back this information? What's the real reason?
And Kirshner has a theory.
Lay it on me.
He thinks maybe, and it does seem plausible given how everything's played out, that the DOJ lawyers are holding back because if they showed their cards, it would prove they went against Judge Boasberg's order.
So they're trying to avoid being found in contempt of court.
Which would be a big deal.
Yeah, that carries some serious legal weight.
It does. And when you add in that comparison Judge Mellett made at the appeals court, about enemy aliens during wartime, it really makes you think the government might be overstepping its bounds.
So let's recap here. We've got the judge's order trying to make sure due process is followed, then the administration refusing to give basic info.
And they're hiding behind the state secret's privilege.
But then there are all these questions about whether that claim even holds water, considering who probably knows this information already.
And then there's Judge Boasberg's background working with sensitive intelligence.
And the possibility that they might have actually violated a court order. Does this all make sense to you?
Because it really highlights the tension that can exist between the executive branch and the judicial branch.
You've got the judiciary there to keep the executive in check.
To make sure the government is following the law and respecting people's rights.
But if the executive branch can just say state secrets and ignore a judge's order,
then what happens to that balance of power? That's a key part of how our government's supposed to work.
Exactly. If they can just decide what's a state secret to avoid scrutiny from the courts, where does it end? What can people do if they're facing government action, but the courts can't even get the basic info to see if it's legal?
It makes you wonder about due process itself.
Big questions.
Huge. And this case, even though it seems to be about this specific group of Venezuelan migrants,
it touches on these fundamental principles of our legal system and the separation of powers that's so important for a democracy to function.
So let's take a step back and look at what we've learned in this deep dive.
We started with the clash between Judge Boasberg, who wanted the Trump administration to reconsider deporting these Venezuelan migrants because of due process concerns.
Right.
And then the administration refused to give him even basic info about the deportations, claiming state secrets. That became the big sticking point.
And we talked about Glenn Kirshner's arguments, right?
Yeah, how calling basic flight info state secrets just doesn't make sense.
And that maybe the DOJ is hiding something.
We also looked at how the appeals court was divided on this, and that comparison one judge made to how even enemy aliens were treated during wartime.
That was a powerful point. It shows how seriously we need to take these due process issues.
It does.
And in the end, this whole situation raises some really big questions about how the state secrets privilege should be used.
Especially when it seems like it's being used to keep the government from being held accountable by the courts.
And to maybe even violate people's basic rights.
Here's something to think about as we wrap up. If the government has this much power to decide what's a state secret, to the point where they can avoid being checked by the courts,
Where does it stop?
what does that mean for how our government is held accountable?
And what about the rights of everyday people when the government comes knocking?
This isn't just about this one case. It's about the foundation of our democracy and how we make sure it works the way it's supposed to.
Food for thought.